Good afternoon. I'm Jeremy with Audio Professionals Northwest. And in this time of craziness, we have lots of AV equipment sitting around, so we thought we'd put it to service serving our community. So today we have Michele Pfannenstiel, I hope I didn't slaughter that, with Dirigo Food Safety and the Small Food Holder, the Small Holder Food Business Development Institute, that's a mouthful, on the line, and she's going to give us some advice on what to do with our food and how food systems are responding in this time of crisis. Michele, really appreciate you taking the time. I know that you're probably getting tens and tens of phone calls from all over the country from people who are in local food systems. I know the people are kind of freaking out about the fact that dairies are apparently dumping their milk these days, because unfortunately I would say that's more of an oversupply than, in market pressure than anything else. But how is local food responding to this crisis, and how do you think local food can be helpful during a time of crisis like this?
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Jeremy. I'm happy to be here. And to answer your question, local food is responding really well because we have short supply chains, which is incredibly helpful in a time when we don't know when the trucks are running and where the trucks are running and who's actually driving the trucks. And so we see lots of really different smallholder food businesses responding. So you and I are in the two different Portlands, and
I'm in the real Portland. You're just in the Portland back east. I'm pointing towards the east.
So you're in the Portland that was named after this Portland.
Hey, don't bring that up. That's the other way, I assure you. That's merely a legend. It's apocryphal. It was spread by our enemies.
So what we see and what I hear from the people I work with out in Oregon and Washington is that there has been a real pivot, and a very fast pivot, of people from supplying restaurants. We used to, for food manufacturers, say, oh, get the restaurant contracts. And there were actually a ton of people who are like, that's a really terrible idea. I hate working with chefs. And those people are the ones that are actually responding super well right now because they never had those. And they've always been going after wholesale contracts to get food into independent groceries and things like that. And they are doing really, really well because the meat supply chain, for example, the pigs don't stop growing, the cattle don't stop growing because of coronavirus, and demand for food has completely skyrocketed in our grocery stores.
The animals may be growing faster because they have milk and produce that the grocery stores can't sell to eat.
Exactly. So we remain having a dairy crisis. So we had a dairy crisis before coronavirus. I imagine we will continue to have a dairy crisis after coronavirus. The dairy crisis has a lot of different sources, not the least of which is American fluid milk consumption has been dropping for my entire life and shows no amount of rebound. And then the second reason is that market forces and governmental regulatory entities have not kept up with how people consume fluid milk and all of those sorts of things. And so
Get the government out of the market and it might help stabilize it.
Well, I mean, some of it is that, but put in good government regulations. The raw milk industry here in Maine is doing fine because we have intelligent regulations. We don't have black market milk. It's not a thing that exists in Maine because it doesn't have to.
So do Maine laws actually provide for selling on-farm sales of raw dairy products?
Oh, absolutely.
That's something that in several states in the Northwest, the food police arrest you as soon as you leave the farm with your jar of raw milk. I think in Oregon they've relaxed some of that, but there are several other states I think that border us where your contraband raw milk can get you tossed in the pokey for various lengths of time.
In Maine, it's actually available on grocery store shelves.
Really?
And it's Oh yeah.
Let me just text my wife. We're moving to Maine.
Right. Okay. So come to the real Portland. Right. And, but I mean, and it speaks to how we can, in a time of, milk has been in a time of crisis, and we can really utilize the paradigm of allowing small milk sales to support our farms in a time right now. I have been advocating since this pandemic started for a change, not necessarily a relaxation, but a reorienting of our cottage food laws. Because there are cottage foods that are just simply not all that dangerous, but they're treated as dangerous because the way the regulations are written, and it doesn't do anybody any good, and it creates a black market. And so the local food systems that are able to respond are the ones that are the most flexible in terms of creating like what we call risk-based solutions. If you don't feed that many people, your risk is by definition low.
Exactly. I think this is what the people in Salem here in Oregon, or in whatever your state capital is, and in Washington, D.C. don't understand. Like, how big is the vector? One industrial food factory cross-contaminates something and could kill tens of thousands of people. Your local farm stand accidentally cross-contaminates something. What are they going to get? A handful of people sick? The exposure of most people to pathogens in food from small holders, from small farms, in my opinion, and I'm not an expert, that's why we have you, is fairly minimal. I mean, how many people I know there's a dairy a few miles from my house, and I'm ashamed to say I've never actually bought anything from them, and I'm going to fix that this week. I apologize to the dairy farmers of Corbett. But, they sell raw milk on their farm. How many people are really, could it be a few hundred people in a month? And out of that few hundred people, I'm not saying that their milk is very pure, I'm just saying, as an example, if they have a few hundred people consuming their product in a month, that is a much smaller vector than a factory farm. I mean, you remember what we saw with the contamination of lettuce in California a few years ago. That was a total disaster. It was a nationwide disaster. So if anything, it seems to me, relax the laws, let people sell their produce, and you still have less exposure than these huge industrial systems and I'm all for industrial systems. They're feeding us all very well, right? I'm too well fed, as you can see right now, by the industrial food system, but still, relax the laws, let people produce food, and, if there are issues, then we can correct them. But otherwise, I mean, the vectors are very small by comparison with 50 million pounds of ground beef being recalled, et cetera.
Right. And what you're talking about is the fundamental difference of American food law than with, say, European and other countries' food laws. Is American food law is based on something called hazards, which are the things that actually make you sick. And in Europe, it's by and large based on risk. And so if you are a small dairy and you only sell at your local farmers market, you have a different set of regulations to follow than if you are Lactalis. Okay. But that's not how we do it in the United States. And what ends up happening is when we make foods illegal, or we make cannabis illegal, or any of those sorts of products, is we end up privatizing the profit, okay, and not getting tax payments on it, I would add, and socializing the cost, because people are in the shadows. They're not having people come out and inspect their farms. In Maine, we test, all raw milk dairies get tested every 5 weeks and inspected every 5 weeks. Like, it's an amazing program. We pay for it, and there are positive public health goods for milk at $92 a hundredweight. That's a pre-coronavirus price, so I'm not sure what the milk price is right now. But you see that in local communities where people are able to cook for their neighbors, because it's not like people learned how to cook, right? And so the
certain
farms
people
and the
haven't learned how to cook until the coronavirus came, but by then it's probably
if you
too late.
Right. I'm sure Mark Bittman's How to Cook Everything is again once a New York Times bestseller. But there are people who can't cook. There are people who lack access to stoves and refrigeration. And there are all sorts of ways that local food is utilizing short supply chains to literally feed those people. I have customers who are delivering food to the food banks. So. it's and that is literally creating community self-sufficiency.
So, a side question. We keep using this term local food like it's something that everybody actually knows the definition of. In your opinion, how would you define local food? Do you define it as restaurants that are feeding people in their local area, or do you define it as people that are using local ingredients to feed food in their local area? I guess it'd have to be a fairly broad definition.
It sort of, so there is actually a legal definition under the food
is.
safety. Yeah, of course there is, right? Under the Food Safety Modernization Act, which was signed in by Obama in 2011 and has basically, been rolling out since then. Local food is defined as within 275 miles or the same state. So our states are a lot smaller over in this neck of the woods.
Yeah, we could fit most of you in Oregon and the rest of you in Southwest Washington. Just saying.
Yeah, and so it gets to be a little silly because there are farms here in Maine that are considered local to the Park Slope Food Co-op in Brooklyn. And so
that does seem a little silly.
It seems a little, so it's several states away, right? And so when we look at local food, there is actually a legal definition of it. And what most people think is food sourced within about the local 75 miles. If you do a radius of 75 miles, is probably a fairly good working definition for most people. And so a restaurant that is buying from local farmers within as much as they can within 75 miles, no restaurant's ever going to be able to buy everything. I mean, it's not like they're about to start growing coffee here in my Portland or yours. And
I don't know, man. The hipster coffee out here is a big thing. They might try.
Yeah, right, exactly.
They only get picked by men with braided beards and the proper clothing.
Yeah, and so but because those folks already have established supply chains, their sources of food are not getting cut off. So they're still able to do curbside delivery. They're still able to, feed people and if people can go get it or they're delivering and that sort of thing. And so their supply chains aren't nearly as disrupted as the folks who rely on commodity meat. I mean, Tyson shut down an entire factory today.
Oh, I just felt a shudder go down my spine. Did they really? Which one?
I think it was a pork factory out in Iowa. And because they don't have enough people to show up to work. Whereas my clients, nobody is shut down because we're all so used to working on skeleton crews that it takes, it doesn't take all that many people to run the business. And we maybe, everybody's producing a whole lot more. And getting the workers in and making sure everybody can be home with their family and all that sort of stuff. And it's way easier for them to respond.
Well, and if you hire introverts, cross off social distancing, right?
Right, exactly.
So, in the interest of full disclosure, my family is from Eastern Europe on my mother's side, and the Romanians have a saying. It says, pork is the best vegetable. So when you say a pork plant closed down, that strikes fear in the heart of this 50% Romanian.
Well, I can recommend some pretty good producers in your neck of the woods that have nothing to do with Tyson.
In fact, we as a family do slaughter a fair bit of our, I hope that doesn't offend anybody out there, but we do take out a few of our own animals. We actually have bought specialized equipment so we can give them a very gentle passing from this life into the next. In fact, the last one that
one bad day.
Exactly. The last one we did, even my kids commented, Dad, that was the quietest, gentlest way. Let's do that every time. So it was actually, it's very,
yeah.
There's something, I hate to put it in sort of religious terms, but there is something sacred about, this animal existed to feed us. So we grew it to feed us. Right. We paid the farmer to feed us. In fact, it's funny. My daughter said, "Hey, Dad, can I have a pig for my birthday?" So now we're growing a American guinea hog in the backyard again. So, she's, thankfully there's a very wonderful local food program that has a surplus of vegetables that aren't quite fit for, when it comes right down to it, they're perfectly fit for human consumption, but not quite up to our American standards, if you know what I'm saying.
Right.
So the pig actually is sort of I think she's like, you know, I had enough today. Just save it for tomorrow. So if anything, she's being overfed. But anyway, back to the
APHs are lard breeds.
They are. In fact, we had one before, and they're lovely things, beautifully marbled. I would encourage anybody out there to go get yourself an American guinea hog. They live on practically nothing. And despite what people say, they will eat grass. They will eat all kinds of things that other pigs reject. And they're really a wonderful breed. And they're small and friendly, so your kids, you don't have to worry about them.
Everything you want in a pig.
Everything, except maybe they don't walk right into the freezer themselves. There is some work required. So what do you think the long and short term, I mean, obviously we're seeing the short term impact is there are certain areas that there isn't milk available, which is amazing in a country that produces an excess of dairy, but it's a distribution issue. It's not, as you well know, not an issue with production. You know, we're seeing some of the really large food systems get major heartburn. I know I was talking with a friend of mine that produces salsa yesterday. Says she got a call from her Cisco rep who said, we have thousands of cases of vegetables rotting in our warehouses. We'll give you whatever you want at $5 a case. Unfortunately, those vegetables were a little bit too far past their prime to use in their food production. So we're sort of seeing this whole kind of contractual where I have so many cases of produce that I have to, you know, I'm pushing the production of produce that maybe the market doesn't want because I have these contracts that I have to fulfill. We're sort of seeing, it's not breaking down, but we can see that it kind of has heartburn. So what do you see the long-term impact of this whole, I hesitate to call it a crisis, but that's really what it is.
Well, I think it is. I mean, it's by definition a global pandemic. I think that one of the things that we have seen in commodity food over the past, I mean, probably in my career, is the movement towards a manufacturing model of food and food production and a just-in-time manufacturing model. And that then makes everything wholly dependent on the distribution channel. And one of the strengths that we have in local food is a much more resilient distribution channel. When one truck stops running, we often get another truck running in ways that, because of the sheer volume of commodity food, they can't actually do. And I think that the commodity food producers are recognizing that and living the reality that a just-in-time system that treats all inputs as equally unimportant or important, I suppose, depending on your point of view, and equally fungible, meaning you can turn them into money in any way that you want, is
As
not
a side
actually
note,
true.
fungible is one of my favorite words. But go ahead.
And so that's not true when it comes to food. It's like literally not true. And just because you can do futures contracts on the Chicago trading boards doesn't actually make pork fungible.
Right.
And local food has always known that, and our strength has always been in not only the supply chain, but the demand chain of people who understand there are ebbs and flows, and there are production cycles, and there are things that happen. We lived through, in 2016, the most expensive animal disease outbreak we've ever seen as a country. Porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. Right?
Good old
I
PEDV.
had producers. PEDV, right. I had producers who lost 80% of their 80% of the babies on the ground in it was horrifying in a 3-month period.
Wow.
And commodity hogs were completely isolated from it by and large, and plus they put 3 litters on the ground every year, but my producers only put 2,
right,
and smaller litters, and because we use historical, like breed genetics
heritage
and things like that,
breeds. Sure.
Heritage genetics things, and they already lived through that. and are utilizing that knowledge of those shocks to be more resilient now. Whereas, especially in places like commodity pork production, we assume moving the pigs inside solves all problems. It doesn't. So,
no. I don't know if they know this, but you can still get sick if you stay inside. Just saying.
I know we might all be finding that out.
Well, I think that the unfortunate thing about, and listen, I am extremely thankful for the modern farming system for agribusiness that has produced food in quantities that is unbelievable. I mean, as I said, my family immigrated here in the 70s, and I've heard a story from an aunt where she just walked into her grocery store and broke down. It was unbelievable to her that, you mean, the way she puts it, she said something like, do you mean that we could have one chicken for everybody? I mean, each person could have their own, not one chicken for everybody. That's what they did in the old country. But, each person could have their own chicken. It was like mind blown,
Right.
It was just, because in Romania in the 70s, Ceausescu was exporting all their food, trying to pay down his national debt. So they might have had one chicken for the 10 of them. And so I'm thankful to large organizations and farms that try to keep America fed, but it does beg the question, if you have 50,000 pigs or 50,000 chickens, or obviously you can have 50,000 chickens in a much smaller space than 50,000 pigs, but you have these huge industrial operations, you take out one piece and the entire system collapses. Where sort of small food is sort of like the internet. You have all these thousands of nodes, and if one node goes down, it doesn't take the whole system out. People in that area might have to go slightly further to get their whatever product they're looking for, but you're not going to take the whole system down. Where you take a Tyson plant offline, and I don't know how many Tyson plants there are, although I did just listen to a fascinating book about Tyson a few weeks ago, but you take out one of their plants, that's going to have a major ripple effect on their entire system, because they're, shipping nationwide.
And then upstream from that, all of the animals like that
right.
plant closes today, those animals don't die tomorrow. Our CAFO system is 100% predicated on animals dying at the right time.
Right.
And I think your analogy about nodes is correct. And there is absolutely a place for commodity food in our system. But I think that, back starting with Earl Butz and Go Big or Go Home in the 70s, it turned a real blind eye to the reality of food networks that keep us strong. I'm an Army veteran. I believe that food security is national security. And when we rely on commodity beef coming in from Brazil or Uruguay or Mexico or wherever, and we pretend it's American by putting a product of USA because we ground it here, that system is not predicated on building national security. That system is predicated on...
We've seen the problem with offshore manufacturing with, what are we looking for lately? PPE for all of our doctors. Something about banning imports of masks and not producing enough locally and then sourcing everything offshore. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense.
Right. And the problem is that rural areas are... even if they are a farm economy, and this happens everywhere. I was at an American Grass-Fed Association meeting several years ago, and they had a whole panel on food insecurity in American farmers, right? Because our American farmers, I think that was the year that commodity hog operations lost $12 a head on their hogs, and which is a lot of money.
We may lose money on every unit, but we'll make it up in volume.
Yes, we will. Right, exactly. And so food insecurity in our rural areas is unbelievable. And the commodity food stream goes down, and there is not the infrastructure right now to feed those populations. But the good news is that local food is able to almost turn on a dime and recognize that and respond to it. And they really are, especially the meat infrastructure, because they're just as soon as we get FSIS to play ball on overtime rules to allow people to do more food production, we're going to have it's going to be a lot easier.
We could have a whole other conversation about the Food Safety Inspection Service of the USDA, but we won't. Not this time anyway.
Next time.
You know, I think you're right. I mean, it almost feels to me like I had a great aunt that lived through the Depression, and it made her extremely thrifty. She was 97 when she died. That was just 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago that she passed away, and extremely thrifty. Unfortunately, probably stocked some food well beyond its expiration date because that's what that's what they did. So it does feel a little bit like people are starting to think, maybe it would be better if we shopped local. Maybe we should hit up the farmers markets. Maybe we should develop, for me, I want to develop relationships with the folks that supply my family eggs, that supply us with the pigs that we occasionally, in fact, the farmer that we got the pig from a few weeks ago said, hey, I'll have something for you in the fall. So, we're sort of developing relationships with these people. The other one will be long gone before the fall, but that's as soon as he has one ready. We'll probably have to find a couple more in between. But, realistically, if we all start developing these relationships, then makes our communities much more resilient. It makes us, I don't have this, but I know who does. You need that. I don't need it, but I know who to point you to go get your cheese or get your pork or get your beef. It's been satisfying for my family, at least, to source our pork and beef a little bit. I mean, we still buy commodity pork and commodity beef because it's just, there's not enough time in my schedule to kill all my own meat. But it's been satisfying to kill. I suppose I should be more polite. Been satisfying to harvest more and more of our own meat as each year goes by, and I find it promotes thrift too. When you are dealing with an entire animal, that head to tail sort of feeling. If you get rid of a piece of that animal, it makes you feel bad. It makes you think, what could I have done to honor this animal more?
Right.
What could I have done to get better value out of the money that I put into this animal, and to provide better nutrition for my family and for my community? So yeah, I think this could be the best or the worst thing that's ever happened to local food, right? Just like everything else, it's going to be what we make out of it.
Yeah, it is entirely what we make out of it. And I think that the people who are stepping up, like my local farmer, he is running 6 times what he ran this time last year in terms of meat. And he decided to expand his greenhouse because he was the only person in town that had produce.
Wow.
Yeah. So
can you grow things in Maine in the wintertime in a greenhouse? Isn't it cold there?
Yes, actually you can. We have plenty of people who do.
We're on the West Coast. We think of Maine with 18 feet of snow and everybody sort of hunkered down and snowshoeing everywhere. Yeah.
Well, we definitely do that,
okay.
But we just came off of maple syrup season, and we had so there are lots of
I'm going to
lots
come
of
visit
different
Maine in the maple syrup season sometime. Apparently you can. We don't have quite the right weather in the Northwest, but there are a few people here and there that nurture sugar maples and tap them even out here in the balmy West Coast. So it's I've been tempted to plant a small orchard of them and see what I can do with them, but who has the time?
It's harder than you think.
All those husbands, I think, that said, I'll get to that project when I have time for it, are now saying, honey, I'll do it when I can get to the hardware store. So that's my excuse. I'll do it when I can get to the hardware store. So from a practical perspective, how do we as locals help keep our local food economy, food shed, food system, whatever you want to call it? How in a time like this do we, because let's face it, our options here in Oregon, we're under this sort of stay at home, stay safe, stay well. Our particular business hasn't been shut down by the state. It's just been shut down by the fact that all our customers are at home. So there isn't a lot of business to be had in the AV industry at this point. But how do we, from a practical standpoint, I mean, obviously going to local restaurants who are trying to use local produce, but from an individual perspective, do you advise people to, because there are no farmers markets at this point, so do you advise people
did they shut down your farmers markets?
As I understand it, at least, large public gatherings. Now, I'm sure people on YouTube will comment and tell me that I'm all wet, and that's cool. But I believe that the orders that we're under now basically ban gatherings of close contact of any kind of over 10 or 15 people. Now, I may be misunderstanding the rules, but it's a little early for farmers markets here in Oregon anyway. They usually don't start in sort of until the spring-ish. But what would you suggest? Like my particular, let's take me as an individual. What should I do to help my local food economy?
Well, so there are a couple of things that you can do. I would just, one of the best things you can do is hop on Google and figure out who your local farm is and call them. You could call your local natural food store. Now, I know you're not anywhere close to Ashland, but the Ashland Co-op is like a thing of beauty, right? And, one of the, I think it might be a good idea to go and look at Ashland's food co-op and see who's selling to them, who may not be able to sell to them, right? And start Googling those people of the products that you want and see where they are and see if you can go pick them up. But there's if you're looking for meat, the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network has put together a substantial Google sheet of just about everybody who is selling online meat, because those rules are fairly easy. So you can support local meat that way. You are the home of Oregon Tilth. Go to Oregon Tilth and look up who your local organic growers are. Call them and see what they have for sale.
Nice. Those are great ideas.
Those are all things you can do.
I suppose we could always ask our friends and neighbors, too, in this time when we should be keeping in touch, right? Where are they getting their food? Where are you getting your food?
Right.
Well, this has been fun, geeking out with you.
This has been so much fun.
And hearing a little bit more about your thoughts for the future. I think we're going to all survive this, folks. We're going to be stronger on the other side. I think we are. So, well, at least most of us will survive this.
Right.
Some of us may not survive, but the rest of us will be stronger for it.
Right. Human beings are adaptive and resilient, and there are people who are going to die, and there are people who have died, and there are, I have a college classmate who's really incredibly sick on a novel therapy, and we're hoping it's going to work. So there
hydroxychloroquine therapy or with
Crapola.
I'm sorry to hear it.
So there are real people being affected by this, and it is hard, but we are resilient and creative people, and I think that the people who are going to do the best are the people who are asking themselves, like, how is this working for me? Right? It's not always working for me all the time, but we allow like kind of the ebb and flow of things that are going on and being adaptive.
So tell folks how they can reach you.
Sure. So I work only with like smallholder food. You can get in touch with me at Michele at DirigoFoodSafety.com, and that's Michele with one L. Or if you want to just sign up for our newsletter, I'm actually sending out emails like every day for folks so that they can be resilient and adaptive, and you can go to sfbdi.com and just sign up for the mailing list right there. And then I run a free Facebook group called The Proofing Box, and that's where I do like a lot of the nitty gritty work. I record my own podcast there. I think last week we did how to do a hazard analysis and set critical control points. So in case you are planning on going into food production, that is basically the place that you need to be.
And if anybody is considering starting a local food business, I think there has never been a better time. I mean, I know things are a little crazy right now, but
things are crazy, but money is cheap.
Yeah. It's true.
This is the cheapest money is ever going to be in our lifetimes.
I think I agree with you. And I think, the more people that are in local food, the better. The more people that are producing their own products and selling them to their neighbors and helping us to build that food security and that sort of network of people that can feed each other rather than, relying on an industrial system. And appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Everybody stay safe and stay well.
All right. Thank you.